I never thought a kiss could unravel my life, but there I was, at the office party, lips locked with Jake, the new guy from accounting. Stupid, right? I mean, I had a loving husband at home, and here I was, acting like a lovesick teenager. 2 days later, while dusting our bedroom, I found it. An engagement ring, elegantly simple, tucked away in a small box. My heart sank. Dan, my husband, was planning to propose again, for our 5th anniversary. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't believe I'd been so reckless. I had to end it with Jake. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. So, the next day at work, I told him straight up, we can't do this. But Jake, with those piercing blue eyes, said, no one needs to know. It's just a bit of fun. Fun? My marriage was on the line. Then, Dan dropped the bomb. Pack your bags, we're going to Paris, he announced one evening, his eyes sparkling with excitement. I forced a smile, my mind racing with the turmoil inside me. Paris should have been magical. It's the city of love, after all. But as we strolled along the Seine, my secret weighed heavily on me. And then, another shocker. I was late. I mean, really late. Panic set in. A pregnancy test confirmed my worst fear. Pregnant. But who's the father? Dan. Who's been nothing but loving and kind, or Jake, the mistake from the office party? As I stared at the positive test, I realized my life was about to change, and not in a good way. Under the sparkling lights of the Eiffel Tower, Dan got down on one knee, his eyes shimmering with love. Will you marry me? Again? He asked, holding out the ring I'd discovered earlier. I said, yes, my voice barely a whisper, my heart a chaotic mess. The moment was perfect, but my guilt, oh, it was suffocating. Back in the hustle of our daily life, things took a darker turn. Jake, Mr. Office Flirt, wouldn't take no for an answer. He cornered me in the break room, hissing threats. Imagine what Dan would think if he knew, he sneered. My stomach churned. This was spiraling out of control. Then, the text started. Unknown number, but someone knew. How's the hubby? One read. Does he know about your little secret? I was being watched, and it was terrifying. Paranoia crept in. Was it Jake? Someone else? I felt eyes on me, always. The doctor's appointment was supposed to be routine. Just a prenatal checkup. But there, with Dan sitting beside me, the doctor blurted out, congratulations on the pregnancy. Dan's face lit up like a kid on Christmas. He was ecstatic, talking about baby names and nursery themes. I should have been happy, but all I felt was a sinking guilt, a relentless, what if? I was living a lie, a terrible, tangled web. With each passing day, the fear of everything crashing down grew stronger. And there I was, stuck in the middle, with no idea how to fix the mess I'd made. Each beep of my phone sent shivers down my spine. The texts weren't just nosy anymore, they were demanding. Pay up, or hubby knows everything. I felt trapped, like a rat in a corner. The only way out? Money. So, I did what I thought I'd never do. I logged into our joint account and transferred the cash. My hands were shaking the entire time. But money leaves a trail, doesn't it? Dan noticed the missing chunk almost immediately. Babe, did you go on a shopping spree or something? He asked, trying to keep the mood light. I could see the worry in his eyes. I hated lying to him. Yeah, I may have splurged a bit, I stammered, avoiding his gaze. I was spiraling, losing grip on the lies and the truth. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Jake dropped a bombshell. I can't be the father of your baby, he said out of the blue one day. I'm infertile. It was a confession that should have been a relief, but it just added another layer of chaos to my already turbulent life. The relief of knowing the baby was Dan's was overshadowed by the mountain of lies I'd built. I couldn't look Dan in the eyes without feeling a pang of guilt. The blackmailer was still out there, and Jake's revelation felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode any second. I was caught in my own web of lies, each day sinking deeper into a hole I had dug myself. And the worst part? I had no idea how to climb out. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. I needed a break, some space to breathe and think. So, I told Dan I was going on a girls' weekend. A lie, but what was one more in the grand scheme of things? I just needed time alone to figure out my next move. But fate, it seems, had other plans. While I was holed up in a tiny beachside motel, trying to make sense of my life, my world came crashing down. Dan found out. The blackmailer had sent him photos of me and Jake. Those soul-crushing, indisputable images that shattered everything. Before I could even attempt to explain, Dan was gone. He left a note that simply said, "I need time." He took his clothes, his things, and the engagement ring, the symbol of our second chance, now just a painful reminder of what we'd lost. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, when the contraction started. It was too early, way too early. The stress, the lies, the constant fear, it had all become too much for my body to handle. I gave birth to our baby, a tiny, fragile little thing, in a sterile hospital room, with no one by my side. And then, as if life hadn't already kicked me enough, I got served. Divorce papers, right there in the hospital. Dan had made his decision. It was over. Our marriage, our future, everything we'd built, gone in the blink of an eye. Lying there, holding my newborn, the reality of my choices hit me hard. I'd lost Dan, I'd lost myself, and now, I was on the brink of losing everything else. The weight of my decisions, my mistakes, was crushing. And I had no one to blame but myself. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. My best friend, the one person I thought I could always count on, dropped a bombshell. "I knew about you and Jake," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "I've known for months. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Betrayed. That's what I was. Betrayed by my friend, my colleague, and worst of all, by myself." I couldn't even look at her. The trust we'd built over years, gone in an instant. I told her to leave, to just get out of my life. And just like that, I was down one more ally in this mess of a life I'd created. Then came the next blow. Jake. He'd been fired. And guess who he blamed? Me. "You've ruined my life," he spat over the phone. As if I hadn't already ruined my own enough. But it wasn't enough for the universe to see me down, it had to kick me too. The final nail in the coffin was my own job. "We have to let you go," my boss said, not meeting my eyes. "Your personal issues are affecting your work." Just like that, I was jobless. Misconduct, they called it. I couldn't argue. I knew it was true. Money. I needed money. The bills were piling up, and with no income, I was drowning. So, I started selling my stuff, the TV, the fancy coffee machine Dan had bought me, even my wedding ring. Everything must go, right? It felt like I was selling off pieces of my life, piece by painful piece. Sitting in my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life I once loved, I realized just how far I'd fallen. From a happy marriage to this. A lonely, broken woman with nothing left but her mistakes. Life's funny, you know? Just when you think you've hit rock bottom, you discover it's got a basement. The blackmailer, the one who'd been haunting me with texts, was none other than Jake. Revenge, he called it, for ruining his life. Irony much? He was the one who started this whole mess, and there he was, playing the victim. I was desperate, clawing for any semblance of my old life. So, I reached out to Dan. I called, texted, even showed up at his office. But he wouldn't see me. His secretary gave me this pitying look as she said, "Mr. Thompson can't meet you." It was clear. I was no longer a part of his world. Then came the blow from my parents. "We're ashamed of you," my dad said, his voice cold and distant. "You're no longer our daughter." That hurt, more than anything else. Disowned. Abandoned. All because of a few stupid choices. With no job, no family, and almost no money, I moved into the only place I could afford, a rundown apartment in a sketchy part of town. The walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the smell, well, let's just say it wasn't pleasant. But it was all I had. And then, amidst the chaos, life decided to throw me another curveball. I went into labor, alone and scared, in that dingy apartment. I remember the ambulance ride, the bright lights of the hospital, but most of all, I remember the deafening silence. No husband holding my hand, no excited grandparents waiting outside. Just me, bringing a new life into my broken world. Holding my baby for the first time should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, it was bittersweet. This tiny, perfect little being, and all I could think about was everything I'd lost, everything I'd destroyed. I was a mother now, but at what cost? Life has a cruel way of kicking you when you're down. Just when I thought I couldn't lose any more, Dan filed for full custody of our baby. His lawyers painted a picture of my life that was hard to deny: unstable, unemployed, living in a dump. I read the papers, each word like a punch to the gut, knowing I was on the brink of losing my little ray of hope. Then, out of nowhere, Jake reappeared. Mister, I caused all your problems, now playing the hero, offering help. I feel responsible, he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was the last person I needed help from, but desperation has a funny way of silencing pride. So, I accepted, telling myself it was just until I got back on my feet. But Jake's help came with strings attached. He moved in, to help with the baby, he said. But soon, he was running my life, telling me what to do, how to act, even how to be a mother. It was suffocating. I felt like I was under his thumb, every move monitored, every decision questioned. I tried to kick him out, once, twice, a dozen times. But each time, he'd get this look in his eyes, this scary, dark look, and he'd say, "If I can't have you, no one will." I knew then that I was in danger. This wasn't just about control, it was about ownership. He saw me as his property, something he could control and manipulate. So, I planned my escape, waiting for the right moment. But every time I thought I had a chance, Jake would reel me back in with threats. Threats against me, threats against my baby. I was a prisoner in my own home, trapped in a cycle of fear and abuse. And the worst part? I'd walked right into it, thinking it was my only way out. The day I lost the custody battle was the day my world truly crumbled. The judge's words echoed in my ears, "Full custody to Mr. Thompson." Dan won, and who could blame him? My life was a mess. I watched, numb, as he left the courtroom, our baby cradled in his arms. That image, it haunted me, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. I had to keep going, though, for my baby, for the slim chance I might be a part of their life again someday. So, I hustled like never before. Waitressing at a diner during the day, cleaning offices at night. The bags under my eyes grew heavier, but I couldn't stop. Not when lawyer bills stacked up like daunting mountains, each one a barrier between me and my child. Then, a bizarre twist of fate, Jake was arrested. Not for what he did to me, but for some other shady dealings. Part of me felt relieved, like I could finally breathe without him looming over me. But his arrest didn't change my situation. I was still alone, still scraping by. Loneliness is a strange companion. It followed me everywhere, whispering reminders of my failures. My apartment felt emptier, the silence louder. Sometimes, I'd hold a pillow, pretending it was my baby, just to have something to hold onto. The final blow came unexpectedly. A friend mentioned it casually, not knowing the impact it would have. "Dan's remarried," she said. He'd moved on. While I was living in a nightmare, he was starting a new chapter. A chapter where I didn't exist. It was like losing him all over again. I remember sitting on the floor of my empty apartment that night, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I had made choices, bad choices, and they'd led me here, to a life of exhaustion, loneliness, and heartbreak. But there was no time to dwell on regrets. I had bills to pay, a job to get to, and a flicker of hope to hold onto. You think you know betrayal, but it has many faces. The latest one? My former best friend cozying up to Dan, my ex. I saw them together, laughing, the way we used to. It cut deeper than I expected. She was part of my past, a past that seemed to be slipping further away, taking pieces of my heart with it. Things kept spiraling. The money I scraped together wasn't enough. The landlord had enough of my late payments. One morning, I found my belongings on the street, the door to my apartment locked. Evicted. The word echoed in my mind, a stark label of my failure. With nowhere to go, I swallowed my pride and found refuge in a homeless shelter. The first night, I lay on a thin mattress, listening to the snores and whispers of others in similar plight. I felt invisible, a ghost wandering through the remnants of a life that once held promise. In that shelter, amidst strangers fighting their own battles, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. So, I started therapy, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I could piece myself back together. Therapy was a lifeline, a chance to unravel the tangled mess of my emotions. My therapist, a kind woman with understanding eyes, listened as I poured out my heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard. But then, another blow, unexpected and bizarre. My therapist, the one person I thought I could trust, revealed she was Dan's new wife. It felt like a cruel joke. How could this be? The sanctuary I'd found in those sessions shattered. She apologized, said she didn't realize who I was at first. But the damage was done. I left her office feeling more betrayed and alone than ever. There I was, back to square one, with my circle of trust broken and my heart in pieces. The road to healing, it seemed, was full of unexpected twists and turns, each one testing my strength, pushing me to the edge. But I had to keep going, for myself, for the flicker of hope that still burned inside me. There's something about seeing your child from afar, knowing you can't reach out, that breaks you in ways I can't describe. I saw them in the park one day, my baby, Dan, and his new wife. They looked like a perfect little family, and there I stood, hidden behind a tree, a mother turned into a stranger. Life didn't pause for my heartbreak, though. I found a job at a local diner. It was a far cry from my old life, serving coffee and pie to weary travelers and regulars who didn't know my story. Every penny I earned was a battle, barely enough to keep me afloat, but it was honest work. It kept me going. Just when I thought I'd found my rhythm, life threw another curveball. I started getting these headaches, you see, and they weren't just any headaches. After a bunch of tests, the doctor gave it a name. A chronic illness that wasn't life-threatening but was certainly life-altering. It meant medication, more bills, and days when I could barely drag myself out of bed. With my health on a roller coaster and my days consumed by work, I lost touch with everyone who'd once been a part of my life. Friends, family, the connections just faded away, like old photographs losing their color. I was alone in a way I'd never been before, disconnected from a world that kept moving without me. And then, the final irony. I heard it through the grapevine. Jake, the man who'd started it all, my ex-colleague and blackmailer, was dead. Killed in prison over some dispute. The news should have brought relief, the end of a chapter marked by fear and threats. But it didn't. It just left a hollow feeling, a realization that the end of his story didn't change mine. There I was, standing in the shadow of all these events, each one a thread in the tapestry of a life I barely recognized. The job, the illness, the loss of connection, the end of the blackmail. They were all pieces of a puzzle that made up a picture I never wanted to see. A picture of a woman who'd lost everything, only to find herself standing alone, wondering where to go from here. Every day at the diner became a reminder of how much my life had changed. The clatter of dishes, the chime of the cash register, the smell of coffee. They were constants in a life that had been anything but stable. It was a simple, unremarkable routine, but in its simplicity, I found a kind of solace, a rhythm to hold onto. But life has a way of reminding you of what you've lost, often when you least expect it. One day, as I wiped down tables, I saw a family laughing together. The sound of their joy was like a punch to the gut, a stark contrast to the silence of my own existence. It was moments like these when the weight of everything I'd lost pressed down on me, a tangible reminder of a past I couldn't return to. Despite the struggles, I found small victories in my daily life. I managed my illness with medication and grit, learning to navigate the bad days with a quiet resilience. The job paid just enough to keep me going, and in the faces of the regulars, I found a semblance of community, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. But the hardest part was the silence from my old life. Friends who'd once been a text away, family who'd shared every holiday, now just distant memories. I reached out a few times, but the conversations were brief, strained. It was clear. I was a part of their past, not their present. The realization stung, but it also brought a sense of closure. I was on my own, truly on my own, and it was up to me to make something of this new life. As for Jake, the news of his death lingered in my mind. His end was abrupt, a life marked by mistakes and misdeeds, much like my own. But unlike Jake, I had a chance to rewrite my story, to find a path through the mess I'd made. His death, in a strange way, felt like a release, a freeing of the chains that had bound me to a past I needed to leave behind. So, there I was, standing behind the counter of the diner, pouring coffee and making small talk, a world away from the life I'd once known. Each day was a step, however small, towards something new, something better. And in those steps, I found hope, a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, I could find redemption in this unassuming new chapter of my